Good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast series here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. For tonight, we have another indie developer on to chat about their games, about game dev, and anything else that comes our way. My guest tonight is from Tetrabyte Games, and they're currently working on the game Emily. Please welcome to the podcast, Filippo. How are you doing?
Great, Josh.
It is a pleasure to have you on. Thanks again for reaching out and wanting to come on to chat about things.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Mm-hmm. For any developers watching, you'd like to come on and chat about game dev, about your games, or anything else, please get in touch. There are many different ways to do so. So, since this is your first time on the cast, could you talk a little bit about who you are and what is your background when it comes to game dev?
Yeah, sure. I'm currently a college student. I'm studying computer science, and I've been working on games, I'd say, for about 4 to 5 years, although I put more effort in the last couple of years, I'd say. Um, the game we're currently developing is our first big project. My team, Tetrabyte, we are 4 members, and we don't have too much real experience. We have done 4/5 game jams on each, and this was our first big project. And we are getting really close to finishing it. We should publish the full game in about a month or so.
Nice. And what is Emily about?
Yeah, Emily is a sort of puzzle game, I'd say. It's a dialogue-heavy game. It's a game about the titular AI, and this whole program, you have to talk to the AI and figure out the various mysteries around it uh, by the way of the branching dialogues and this password system. You have a full database with some hidden codes. You have to input words and you have to find out if there's stuff related to the codes you input. We want to have a pretty free experience. We don't want to. We want the player to find themselves figuring out what might be something related, what might not. It's a lot of trial and error.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you and your team been working on it for?
Yeah, the project was created around 2.5 years ago, but we've been working on it on and off again for a lot. So actual development is a lot shorter than that, maybe a full year. So
Okay.
we've had some rough patches with the game, and also we're still struggling because our skills have improved drastically during the development. So I'm still having to deal with issues of my bad code and game design issues from the start.
Hmm.
But we decided to stick it through and try to publish the game as best as we could.
Yeah, and with kind of developing Emily, like this being like you and your team's first game, what were like some of like the challenges like you ran into as kind of a first time developer?
So the whole game actually started as a side project to another bigger game, which definitely suffered from a lot of scope creep. And the game started off as a test to a branching dialogue system that, in hindsight, was way too complicated for the kind of game we wanted to make. The old game was supposed to be sort of Metroidvania, 3D Metroidvania with a sort of like the nemesis from the Resident Evil series, like a big bat following you around the whole map. So you had to, and we wanted to have branching dialogues, but it was, like, thinking back, unnecessarily complicated, and it sort of developed into its own game, which has been a great experience for us because it's helped us getting into this whole field. Um, for example, even our composer is is really good, but of course, developing composing music as like separate pieces, and for video games it's pretty different. And also like I'm also the only programmer on the team, so my skills have also developed a lot during this time. I started learning to code before starting my university, so I had no experience. I started with Godot, and then now the game is being developed in Unity. Uh, we thought about changing the engine a couple times, but we decided to just try to finish the project as is. And also, I think the hardest part so far was figuring out the whole Steamworks side of things, like setting up the various pages, getting everything approved. Because before this, we've only had each like the whole each experience is a lot easier. It doesn't require half as much the effort you need to put on Steam.
What you were saying about kind of like over scoping at the beginning, that's something that I've definitely have seen from a lot of developers. I mean, those that have become fairly established. There's always that challenge of knowing just what you want your game to be, and then what can you reasonably do as a developer.
Yeah, the whole idea of the old game, I don't want to say it's been scrapped because it's still a project I want to make in the future. But we realized that with the skill level we had, it was nearly impossible to make, or it would have been a lot worse than we hoped it would be. Even like with the main thing about that game being a big bat following you all around, we had to make it so it will feel nice, especially in like a Metroidvania sort of game. So it couldn't be something like put together roughly. It has to be something well studied. So we decided to put that aside for the time being, and I don't really think I'm still at the level of making that game. I don't think our next project will be that game, but I really hope to be able to one day get to make that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something that I see a lot more from developers. I think over like the last like 3 to 4 years is not immediately rushing to make like their dream game or their eye in the sky game. They're like try to build up your skills, try to learn, and then get to that point. And with this being like you and your team's first game, it's always that challenge. So I recently spoke with another first time indie developer, and we were discussing about how it's so challenging to know where to begin as a developer, because you can, again, as a designer, you can make literally anything that you want, but making something that someone else wants to play is a completely different story. I know we were going to chat a little bit about that balance between art versus a product, because that is something that
Yep.
is a universe, or I should say it's an evergreen topic, because it's something that I've seen developers struggle with 10 years ago. I'm sure they're going to be struggling with it in another 10 years from now.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to draw a line, especially I'd say when you don't really have an idea of what you're putting yourself in when first starting a game. And I'd say the scariest part for me, at least, is that first initial stage of a game. Like, I want to get into a new project. I have a lot of ideas, but at the same time, what scares me the most is starting with a new blank project. Because now, whenever I open Unity, I know where things are. Everything is there. I can fix some stuff. I can tweak some things. Starting from scratch scares me a little.
And
And
oh, go ahead.
oh no, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'll go finish your thoughts. I had another question I wanted to ask you.
Oh yeah, it's just that yeah, there's this whole thing about being able to think about something you want to make, while at the same time this whole thing, aside from the hard side, is still about games. So games don't necessarily have to be, I don't think that games necessarily have to be fun, but at least they have to be playable, or someone has to know what to do when they open your game.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And, two people can have very different definitions when it comes to fun. I've played super massively difficult games. That's my relaxing time. Someone else maybe just want to enjoy a very cozy or very easy game.
yeah, that's definitely a thing. People have different tastes, and also they have different not only skill levels, because especially for like the hard side of things, it's difficult to get like a person from outside the whole video game world to
Mm-hmm.
get them to like think that, I don't know, Dark Soul is an art piece. It's an art piece when they can't even get past the start of the game. So there's this whole thing about even. I mean, it's also about I think about genres, because now Death Stranding 2 is about to come out, and like I don't think that is a game that everyone enjoys. I know some people who definitely enjoy that type of game. I enjoy that type of game, but I see why many people might not enjoy the gameplay of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the story is separate, but the gameplay is still a main part of the experience.
Oh, which game did you say?
Death Stranding.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's another one in terms of, what the audience or the consumer base is for. Because I know people who absolutely adored that one. I played it for about, I think, 5 to 6 hours, and I saw what it was doing, but it just was not clicking with me. Maybe at some point I'll go back and give it another go.
Yeah, there are those games that you want to like, but the gameplay isn't for you. I've had those experiences, but I mean, I've also been one of those who played No Man's Sky from the release. I actually enjoyed the game at launch, which, thinking back on it, was definitely a, a rough game. Like, there was little to do, but not every game is for everyone. That's unfortunately a thing. So,
Mhm. And before we talk a little bit more about design, I wanted to ask you in terms like one thing I always like to ask developers. So your team is based out of Italy, is that right?
yep.
Nice. And one question I always like to ask developers, especially while I'm talking out of the United States, is how is the local game dev scene, like where you're at?
Before starting this whole journey into game development, like I would have told you that it was basically non-existent. But over in time, especially started going to conferences, started not necessarily meeting directly people, but I've also discovered some new games, and it's definitely not as present as I'd say in America or other places, but it's definitely there. And even if not directly, I've met some great developers. I've seen some great games. Uh, I've seen some games that started great and fell a bit. I, I feel this way about like Enotria. I don't know if how famous the game actually got, because here in Italy was a pretty big deal, at least in the for those who knew a bit more about it, about the game scene. But then the game was like okay, like people were expecting a sort of masterpiece, a Souls-like but Italian,
Mhm.
and it was just like okay. They put a lot of effort in the game, but I've seen a lot of games not getting any sort of big recognition that I think needs some more like mm, anything from roguelikes to not only visual novels. I've seen a lot of projects, and it's also hard to get out there because there's I think like there's a media wall. Like people in Italy don't like news, don't talk much about it. Like it's a general problem, I think, worldwide. Like there's still a divide between the video game community and like the general public.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think that's much more present like in Italy or in places where it's not as common.
Yeah, and I've seen that when I've spoken with like other like international developers. Like when we talk about like major game dev spots, like Canada, Poland, Brazil has been growing very rapidly in like the last 10 years in terms of game dev. There is that very huge acceptance. There's many countries that now have grants for developers. But when you're in an area that doesn't really have a game dev scene, or you're like the first or one of the first, it is very hard, I feel, to get that name out there. I interviewed a developer, this was like, I won't say like 6, 7 years ago, who was trying to get game dev going in, I think it was Jamaica. And there was just like no one else around. And it's that challenge of how do you get people excited about a game even locally if no one knows that there's like studios in your local area?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like the situation here is like that. There are definitely a lot of developers in Italy,
Mhm.
and but there's still that divide. Like, if I talk to someone on the street or someone I know that plays video games but is not into the game development scene, I don't think most of them would know any Italian studio. But there are some great people in the Italian community, and definitely we are definitely not the first. But even the fact that before starting this whole journey, I had heard of none of them, it's so strange thinking back.
Mm. And with, I guess, like, to build upon what we were talking about a few minutes ago with the regards to Emily, I guess, like, from, like, the original design to where it is now, what kind of, like, attracted, like, you and your team to, like, this concept as, like, your first big game?
Uh, we definitely had a bottom-up style development. We first thought of the whole branching dialogue mechanic, and there was an initial idea of the story, but it developed alongside the actual game. The story came sort of. I don't want to say that the story came second to the game because it's not true, but um, in we got we started with this project, this idea, and at first it was pretty bare bones. It was just like a dialogue with multiple options, something that might be a secondary mechanic in maybe most games. But we then thought of this mechanic of like having to search. It's like you're put in front of a computer that's not yours, and you're trying to figure out something about its owner through the files they have on that computer. You don't know what you have to look for to like know to get to know more about this person. So you just start looking in random places and see what you find. And this is the idea we want to keep. I don't know how well we managed to do it. We're now starting to, well, not starting now, but now that we have the finished game, we're just polishing it more. We're starting to get some people to try the full game to get their opinion, their feedbacks. And there's this problem, like with the game, which I don't think there's an easy solution with this type of games, which is how do you make a sort of puzzle that still feels challenging while not throwing the answers in your face?
And as
Because
someone,
there are people who won't get the full experience, and that's not something you can work around.
Mhm. As someone who has played so many puzzle games and adventure games, I can certainly relate to that one. It is very challenging. I've spoken with adventure game developers in the past, and it's always that like very tough line to walk between: do I make a puzzle that's very interesting, unique, but at the same time, if so many people don't get it or they feel like the solution is poor or it annoys them, that can be as just as damning as having a really bad action segment in a reflex-driven game.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely been the hardest part about the whole game because the game it's pretty short. I think you can get the full experience in less than 2 hours, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like we've gotten used to games being around from 30 hours to a couple hundred hours. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with short games. We don't plan to don't plan to sell the game for a lot, just a couple bucks. So um, I think there's more of this: how do you get in such a short time an experience that most people will get to enjoy, while not having the time to build so many different mechanics that make up something maybe more interesting. Unfortunately, the game, I think it's pretty limited in some aspects, but I also think that's a bit of the strength of it. You don't get lost too much in side things. So I think the game is a short experience that hopefully leaves the player like an afternoon playing it with a good memory of it. And there's also the whole. I hope the game has a good replayability with this like database system, password system. Maybe you finish the game and maybe you open the game once and try to look for some other stuff. I decided not to put an indicator of any sorts to signal when you found everything, because I like the idea of someone always having like the doubt that have I truly found everything there is to find. I like this idea of the game.
Mhm. And short form games, as you said, I think has really grown popularity. Again, like it's another topic we've talked a lot about here with other developers. This idea that, again, like 10, 15 years ago, your game's quality was measured with how many hours you can get out of it. The whole, 80 to 100 hour long RPG was a big part of that. Today, people have way too many games to play, especially yours
Yeah,
truly, and I think a lot more people are receptive to this idea of it's an amazing 30 to 90-minute long game. It's not going to cost you a huge amount of money. It's not going to take up all your time. You get to enjoy some for maybe an afternoon or a weekend, and yeah, that's it. And, short form horror has really exploded so
yeah,
much over the past decade.
yeah. Titles like Iron Lung or Mouthwashing
Mm,
definitely blew out in the last couple of years, and I think there's something nice about it, because definitely in contrast to the AAA scene, having these shorter titles, like as you said, I can buy on Steam for $2 a game, spend 30
mhm,
minutes on it, have a nice experience, and still get maybe to spend those 200 hours on a bigger game that I like. So they don't go into conflict with one another.
mhm.
So
And it also, I think, adds a kind of like the mystique of some of these games. Like something like with mouthwashing, like it really blew up. I know there's a huge
yeah,
fandom around it now, and you never really know as a developer how your game is going to do in the public space. And we even go with something last year with Balatro, and yeah, I think it's becoming more and more important for developers to again try to think about how their game is going to resonate with people. And again, that also goes with understanding the market of who you're trying to reach.
yeah. Also, like in this whole thing, I think like Balatro and mouthwashings are on opposite sides. A game is purely story driven, and the other
Mm-hmm.
is gameplay driven. Both great titles. I've been playing Balatro recently. I got to play it like in the last week or so, and yeah, it's as addictive as I heard it. And yeah, because with shorter titles, you can be sure also to focus on creating a great experience for the player, and not just stuffing like side content in it just to have the player spend another 5 hours with a pointless chasing section or find this objective in this random area. You've been here in like 4 hours ago.
And the older version of that was the mandatory stealth section in so many action games of the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, like those sections that would take up an hour, maybe even less, but that were definitely slower, just to add some pad time. And I'm glad that this philosophy sort of it has not died out, but it's getting slowly. People are thinking more about it because I've read like not too long ago there was, I think, this whole discourse about some CEO, don't remember the company, saying that games should be paid depending on how the playtime is. And I think that only leads to filling your game with random, useless stuff. That just makes the player stare at the screen, all like the left stick, and look at the screen for like 30 minutes waiting for thing.
And I think it also leads to a lot of developers trying to kind of, I guess, like gamify or game their sales to like say, okay, we're going to purposely try and make this game exactly 2 hours long, or we're going to take it just to the refund window, because then, you know, no one can refund our game, even if it hurts the quality of it. And it's a trend I think we see from a lot of like lesser developers, especially like the last, you know, decade, with everyone trying to chase whatever is the new big name, be it Slay the Spire, Balatro, Vampire Survivors, Darkest Dungeon, like you name a big name game, and there will be developers trying to chase that formula, you know, to the letter, thinking that their game will come somewhat close to that success.
Yeah, I don't think there's nothing wrong with like trying to add your spin on a successful game, but there have been definitely many clones of popular games. As you said, people trying to follow the flow of like those big hits. And like you said about the Steam refunds, we thought about it. I had a conversation about that like last night with our game composer, and at this point we've just come to the realization that people will refund our game. Like someone will definitely do it. The game is like, as I said, like less than 2 hours if you spend a lot of time on it. And I don't want to add like extra content just to avoid that. I don't want to add some useless parts to the story just to go over that 2 hour mark, or because that would be forcing content into a game that doesn't need it.
Yeah. And again, it hurts the quality of your game, which in turn will kind of hurt how people view your studio. And a huge part that I've been seeing from a lot more developers over like the last like year or two has been trying to focus more on sustainability. With so many studios being going under, and you know how bad the market is, like you really can't, I think, sacrifice long-term health for short-term game anymore, because a lot of developers are just not, you know, surviving more than 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, we're like our team in particular. We're definitely now we're able to do this. I won't say full time, but a lot more freely because we're college students. We're all still living at our parents' house, so we don't have to worry about actually having the money to pay rent or similar. And our game is working with a really small budget, so we don't have to worry about making, like, this game doesn't have to make us money. That's not the point of the game. We don't want, this doesn't have to be a successful game like in that sort of side. Like, we want to make something that we think it's good. We want to make something that we're passionate about. If we wanted to make money from it, we could have made a lot of changes. We could have made a completely different project. that was not the point.
Mhm.
Of course, I know uh, even for me in the future, there's people, if you want to live off game development, it's a whole other story because you can't have this philosophy when making a game. And I think we're all on the team aware of that. That right now this can only be made from us in this particular time.
Mhm. Yeah, and like what you just said there about kind of not being interested in the monetary aspect of it, it's a very tough conversation I've had, or I've seen like a lot of developers have over the past decade. Like one of the things I say, like for long time people watching us, is that a lot of the stuff that I talk about on Game Wisdom from a design standpoint, I'm approaching things from that standpoint of, are you trying to make something that you intend to sell, that you are trying to live off as a studio? And when you're, as you just said, like if you're going for that metric, you do need to pay more attention to how the market is. Like, what does someone expect out of a game these days? But if you are going to these from like a learning standpoint, from an artistic standpoint, then you're kind of more free to go nuts. You can do whatever you want when you're not worried about whether or not this game's going to be a huge return on your investment. But I do feel like it's still important to take something away from that project, like whether it's how the game dev process was, how was it like programming, coding it, or even just what did people who played your game ultimately think about it, because you can then apply that to your next game and the game after that.
Yeah, because like as I said, we're not, the main goal isn't to get rich from this game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there is a possibility of us right now earning a lot from this game, and that doesn't bother me, honestly, because I'm happy with the game as a whole. Of course, we could make a lot of improvements on it, but I like that it comes from a passion. And it's also been a learning experience from us. As I said, this as a first project allowed us to learn about some things that we didn't think about, like the teamwork side of things, even some random stuff, like not random, but some things that we didn't think about, like what programs to use, what files to use. Like, you have an audio file. How do you give me your game file? How do you translate? Like, how do you can you give me a Blender model? Like those sort of things that you don't think about necessarily when getting into game development. Like you think about maybe the design. Oh, I want to make a game that's like this. I want to make this big game, and then you get to, okay, how can I give you this like 3D render of a house without making your PC burst into flame?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the game dev side is incredibly challenging for first time developers, especially if you're coming at this, while you're trying to learn a new engine for the first time. So, what was it? I guess as another question for you as a first time developer, what was it like learning Godot and then switching over to Unity?
Well, it was definitely a big change. There wasn't necessarily anything wrong with Go. I thought about switching back a couple times, and I still want to try to make something with Godot as like a smaller project to still be able to switch whenever I want. Like it's difficult switching from
Mm-hmm.
engines like that, but still being able to have a good grasp. Both can be good. And there there's been like also from Godot to Unity, it's a different programming language, so there's that there. So, and it's also getting familiar with the engine because now I know where all the different windows, all the different things are on Unity. So I'm able to do things a lot quicker than back then when you even have to download some package and you have to go look up for, okay, so in Unity, where do I file in package manager? And that's like maybe even a 5 to 10 minutes break just to find the window you need. So like this project also helped us in that sort of like in that way, because now it still scares me starting a new project, but I think things will go a lot quicker.
Yeah. And it's something that I see from a lot of developers, that being able to accelerate the game dev side as they go from project to project. And it it gets back to what we were talking about at the start, that working on your dream game before you know how to actually build a game is often what can lead to failure for a lot of developers, or lead to a game ballooning its game dev time. In a recent conversation, I was talking about how, like, 10 years ago, when I spoke to like a new or starting developer, their idea was, I'm going to spend 8 to 10 years on my first game because it's the one that I really, really want to make. And oftentimes, when that game takes that long, even if you did spend all that time, either part time or full time on it, it may not turn out to be all that well because you had to spend so much time learning the process as you go through it. But being able to, I guess, take a more iterative approach is something that we've seen more developers do. Like, again, more notably over like the last 5 to 7 years. And I think it's turned out better and more sustainable for a lot of developers.
Yeah, like going back to that big project I talked about before, I think that if we had to spend like 4 to 5 years on that, starting directly on that big project, especially because our skills developed a lot in the meantime, if I had to work with like 3 to 4 years old code from a version of me that wasn't so good at programming,
Mhm.
that definitely would have hurt the project as a whole. And like, of course, now I'm dealing with that with this smaller game, but because it's a smaller game, I can go and try to change some things without really like blowing up. But changing, for example, the script for I don't know, the save system on a much bigger game, like 4 years in, can be really scary. So I'm glad that we didn't like jump directly in this big project. So
And I guess with like how your team's been going, and as we were saying earlier, that Emily is going to be coming out very soon, or at least soon at the time of our recording this. What have you
yeah,
been thinking about in terms of, I guess, like ending the game? Because this is, again, something that for every project is a very different experience. So, like, how do you decide, like, when a game like this is done as a first time developer?
we definitely had a like we set a line for the length of the game, like the story side of the game. But there is like I'm still adding from time to time things to that database system, because that could potentially be endless. So at some point I have to say like, okay, that's it, I'm done adding stuff. And we're still gonna have to open project from time to time going forward, because there's also the side of fixing bugs, something that maybe you didn't account for when first making the project. The person found a way to crash the game in some obscure way. So you open up the project back up and you try to fix everything. But as for adding content, yeah, we're reaching a point where we're gonna say, okay, this is the whole game, and we're done at adding stuff.
With, like, the gameplay itself, as you were saying earlier about trying to kind of like find that balance between making something that's like interesting, unique versus something that people will want to play or experience. With like some of the more out there games that I've seen, like we can talk about stuff like Animal Well. Again, we can mention Mouth Washing and some of the other ones. It's a very, as I said, it's a very tricky balance between how much you want your game to stand out and how much you want to kind of like rein it in so that someone can actually play it. And one of the, I think, hardest areas for like new developers is when it comes to like QA and playtesting. So, like with like you and your team, like have you done like QA? Like, has there been like an approach to like getting eyes on this game to see like what they think about it?
We've done some QA testing, not a lot. Like we've had some people try the game, and we've had some different reaction as I expected, honestly.
Mhm.
Even from the the next fest, we had like a couple reviews which were like on opposite sides. There's people who really enjoy the game, seem to be able to figure everything,
Mhm.
and there's those who get stuck like at the start and or don't seem to. We've had a tester like ask us if the game was story driven or gameplay driven, and I think that it's pretty strange for my mainly dialogue based game. So
Mhm.
there's there are people who are not gonna get it, and I think the testing sides it's more like seeing how big the split is. Like, is it a 50-50? Like, gonna get like 8-10% aren't gonna get the game, and it's striking a balance with this split. That's the main part of the testing.
And again, like when you're doing like public QA testing like that, you'll get all kinds of responses. What was I about to say? Um, yeah, like with like the thought about like where someone can get stopped in a game, like that is another like very lengthy discussion to be had. And it goes again back to what we were saying a few minutes ago about kind of like adventure game design. That you have one puzzle that the person cannot figure out at all, the game is done for them. Like they are never going to play that game. They will never finish it. Just you'll have someone who will blaze through every single thing and then be like, "Why are these puzzles harder? Why isn't this game,
Yep.
mind-breakingly difficult?"
Yeah, I think like maybe it's not a good thing to say this, but I think you have to value a bit less when testing people who get stuck maybe at the start, because I think it's a way bigger problem if people get stuck like at 3/4 of the game. Because if you get stuck at that point, it means that you got the mechanic, you got that far, and you still got stuck in the game. So I think getting stuck at that point means there's something bigger. There's a bigger problem because maybe if you got stuck at the start of the game, there's maybe you don't enjoy the mechanics, or maybe it's not your type of game. But if you get stuck like at the end, there's a bigger problem.
And like if they get stuck, halfway through, three-quarters of the way through, and the game like leaves a really bad taste in their mouth because of that, more than likely they're not going to support your next project because they're going to remember how annoying that game was or where it just like kind of broke down for them.
Yeah, especially if you're going to make something really similar, there is always going to be that doubt that maybe you've even better the game, you've fixed some stuff, but if someone gets stuck, it's hard to convince them that no, I can assure you the game is better, or this new game is different from the last one. And so I think you have to give a lot more attention to people who get, as I said, stuck in later parts of the game. Uh, at the point you've gotten the game, and there's also, if you're enjoying maybe the story or the gameplay and you can get past the point, as you said, it leaves a very bad taste in your mouth. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're enjoying an experience and you're not able to finish it, it's way worse than not getting into the game as a whole.
I think part of that is also having to understand who your market is for the game. And again, this is something that first time developers and even long time developers have always struggled with. That notion of, am I building this as some like super hardcore, very difficult game? Is this going to be meant for, a very casual audience, somewhere in between? And especially when you're doing something like very original. Like we look at something like like Doki Doki Literature Club or Mouthwashing. I don't think the developers were thinking about like who their exact market segment was for games like that.
Yeah, yeah. I, I also think that if you have like those sort of very different ideas, I also think like our game, it's pretty different from most things you can find on the market, or at least on the popular games, but not too dissimilar maybe from, as you said, a Doki Doki. But so there's a market there. There's definitely people who enjoy those type of games. So we're not making. I wouldn't say. I think there's also a market for every type of game. If you're enjoying making the game, and if someone around you at least seems to enjoy the game, I think you'll always find at least someone who enjoy, even if it's a weird experience, there's always someone who's going to enjoy even those quirky games you find randomly for like $1 on each, or those Steam sales game that you find and just buy.
And like I said, like you never know like when something will resonate with people. And it's just like trying to figure out what that spark is, in particular with your game, that leads to that chase when it comes to game development.
Yeah, and there's the thing is, you can chase like those weird ideas if you're trying to live off game dev. You definitely, it's a big risk, because even mouthwashing, as popular as it is now, I'm sure when the curator was developing it, it wasn't like this clear that it was gonna be so successful. So you have to take a bit of a leap of faith, or just believe that someone will enjoy your game. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying to make rent of your game, that can be hard. Like, can I really afford to maybe make a flop, like spend 2 years, 4 years on a game that no one will play? And it's a scary side of this whole, like, the whole indie game development scene.
Yep. And it's something that I think is only going to get more and more challenging, more and more nightmarish as things go on with more games being released. And just, again, this idea that are you trying to make a game that's going to compete with, whatever is the big name game out of the time, or do you try and make your own thing? But the risk of making your own thing is that if there's non-market for it, people don't know who you are, they're not going to find your game. And like it's something that I have seen time and time again, especially all the games I cover, that I have played games that have had like less than 10 reviews on Steam. I have played games that have 0 reviews on Steam. And it's just like getting people excited about that is incredibly difficult, because someone will point out, well, my game is just like Elden Ring, or my game is just like Grand Theft Auto. Okay, but do you have the marketing budget of
Yeah,
Rockstar or From Software? Because if you don't, people aren't going to find your game.
yeah, it's definitely hard. Like, it's a gamble knowing if someone will play your game, and this comes back to the, like, making a product versus making something that maybe you enjoy. Because even going to we thought about making, and we might be making in the future, for example, a Souls like, but especially when there are so many Souls like, it's how do you sell your game as different enough while still getting someone, like, if you're marketing the game to someone as a Souls like and that's it, how do you convince them, like, not to spend those $15 on a maybe more popular game, or just buying the Dark Souls remastered and play that again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a very tough answer to have, because people are not like beholden to playing every single game out there, and they have to choose between playing a game from Software or from Nintendo, or pick any major name, or a game from a studio that they've never heard of, that it's like $3.99 on Steam. They're going to go, well, why should I spend on this game when I can get from this brand name AAA studio that I've heard of, all my friends can't stop talking about. Why don't I just play that?
Yeah, I give a lot of credit to those who just go randomly on Steam and each and other stores and just buy random games, because you might find some really good games, and maybe you'll find some okay games, because I don't think that most games in these things are bad. I think most are okay.
Mhm.
You're gonna have a okay time for $10 maybe, but
Mhm.
there's always the thought or of, well, I could have spent that money on some game that I've heard before, and maybe I'll enjoy it a lot more, but maybe I won't get to know a game that I'll enjoy a lot more. So, because once you find, maybe in a friend group or something, like someone finds a good game that no one's heard of and then gets spread around, but being the first one to like go and buy a random game, that, I mean, it's also, that's also a gamble.
Yep. And there are people who, like, if they see anything that's below $5.99 or $9.99, they're just going to go, it's probably a scam or ripoff. Why would I, risk it?
Yeah.
This amount of money when I spend, $24, $34 on, what's supposed to be the higher quality game. And it kind of gets at what we were talking about earlier in terms of short form games, where a lot of the short form games are often, $4.99 or cheaper. And it's kind of like that, getting your foot in the door, like convincing someone that yes, you can get a very great game for under $5. Is it going to be a 15 to 20 hour long game? No, but it's going to be something that you can enjoy and you'll walk away happy from it.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is, like, the hard part is stopping those first maybe 10, 100, 1,000 people, like stopping those first people and getting like, hey, my game's here, and maybe those 100 people, 1,000 people spread them to friends and family, and from there, hopefully, the game gets noticed more. But it's hard to find those first people, especially if you're making, as we said, like short games or games that don't have a clearly defined genre. Because you can point to a game with a knight that rolls around and say, okay, it's sort of Dark Souls, so you can point to, I don't know, an FPS and say it's sort of like Doom or it's sort of like Call of Duty. But when you get to those weirder games, it's also harder to, like, maybe you look at the screen caps on Steam and you say, well, it's something, and you don't know, am I gonna spend like $3 on something? I'm not sure. Also, like, if there are Steam sales, I don't see why not for like $3 buy something that might be weird, might be a good experience. And even if it's a bad experience, if you don't enjoy the game much, I don't think you should refund like smaller games, because maybe those €3, like, for a okay experience, it's sort of like, it's good, I think, to encourage small creators. I've bought games for like $1, played them for 18 minutes, and stopped playing because maybe I couldn't figure out how to move forward, or I simply didn't enjoy the game very much.
Yeah, man,
But
I was gonna say I'm the same way. Like if I buy a game for like $3.99 or less, I typically don't refund it even if I only play for like 5 to 10 minutes. Because I mean, it's $3. Like that's not a lot on my book, but again, like it can be the difference between developer being able to call their game a win or even just breaking even.
yeah, I think there's also like, if you played a game that you bought randomly, and even if you didn't enjoy the game, I think it's always good to leave some sort of feedback to the creator. Like, even a bad review on a small game, I think, does a lot more than just ignoring it and refunding the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot better to leave a not recommended with an explanation of why you didn't like the game than just getting the money back and going forward.
And it goes again with what we talk about with having feedback. That as a developer, whether you are new or such, you really need to get feedback on what your game is doing. Because if you don't, you can end up not understanding why people aren't playing your game. And it's something that I had a little talk about earlier in 2024, where I discussed kind of, what does it mean to study the success of a game? Because you can say that your game did amazingly well. Let's say it brought you $500,000, $1 million, anything like that. But if 80% of the people quit your game within 20 minutes, they're not coming back for your next game. They're not going to, if you go into your next game thinking, oh, I'll have an easy 500,000 audience will buy my game day one, and you put your game around that, what happens if they don't show up? Where do you get the money at that point?
Yeah, there's like the whole, you have to grow when making a game as a game developer. Your next project should be better than your last one. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that like as a success, because you might make a project that you're prouder of and that might sell less, or maybe your previous project sold more by luck, maybe. So it's not about success, it's about your experience as a game developer becoming better and growing as a creator in general. So you can't just publish a game or even like put up a page or something and ignore it and just put it there. Or, I mean, you can, but if you want to really create something special, it's a process. Your first game, I mean, there's always gonna be like the local funk that makes Balatro as his first project, but I think like for 99% of people, it's not gonna be like that. So it's a process.
But that won't stop people from trying to, again, like math out, the perfect formula to their game. I'll just repeat a little bit of Balatro, a little bit of Vampire Survivors, a little bit of mouthwashing, and lo and behold, I'll have, the next IGF winner, the next Video Game Awards winner.
Yeah, but like, if you think about like the really popular games, the last really popular games, they're not repeats of the previous ones. Even like thinking, of course, the Baldur's Gate has experiences as parts of previous game, other Larian Studios projects, but there's something new in that. And even Balatro is not something like it's something new, but that's not to say that you can't make something that already exists, because I think that's basically impossible. Or at least it's really difficult to make something completely new. But I think people still feel somehow when a project is soulless. Like, if you made your project from just parts of popular games and that's it, if you didn't add anything of your own, people will feel that, and it has not worked. I mean, it has worked in some ways for AAA games, but critically, I think people are noticing. If people critic the next Pokemon game because it's been the same for like the past 20 years or so, you have to somehow try to make something new, I think, of your game. And that's not just mechanics wise or gameplay wise. I think there's you have to put like new passion in your game,
and there has to again like be like that spark of what makes your game special to everyone else. It can be a little one, it can be a big one, but you can't just say my game is just like Dark Souls or my game is just like Balatro, because again, why would someone play your game if they have those games already available? And with trying to like again like make something, I think like ultimately like when it comes to any developers, there's always that spectrum. Oh, let me rephrase that. And I think with any developers, there's always that challenge, as we were saying earlier, in terms of art versus like a product. Of does that spark that I want in my game, is it something that's going to resonate with me or with people who think like me? Or can the market as a whole appreciate that? Like when we go back to something like with Balatro, like Balatro is a deck builder. Like that's its whole charm. It's something as a design that we've seen countless times since Slay the Spire kind of blew up the genre. But it did do something that was original and different. And it was that originality that resonated with people. And I do feel like, as I was saying, that there are some developers and even publishers who feel like you can, chase that spark. That it's something that can be replicated very easily. As another point, we saw this with people talking about Baldur's Gate 3. And how, again, like Larian has spent a better part of, I think, like 20 years, maybe more than that, making CRPGs and getting into RPG design. Like, as an RPG studio, they know that genre inside and out. And you can't, I think, really, again, like, force it. You can't, go into making a game saying, I will design this game so it will perfectly resonate with, the 18 to 30, housewife crowd who only wants to play match 3 games and also loves roguelikes. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I think you can, like, plan this. You can try to plan these sort of things, but ultimately it's just luck, because I think for a game to be successful, aside from it being a great game, it has to be released at the right time. I don't think, like, going back even a game like, I don't know, Animal Crossing has always been really popular, but I think New Horizon was released at the perfect time, aside from, like, the whole pandemic. And not just that, like, even Balatro, I feel like it was released in a time where there's always, like, recently there's been more of this distrust towards AAA games. So it was a really good indie game. It was with an addictive gameplay. And I think it being an indie game also helped it, with people talking about, if your $60 to $70 game is disappointing, then you point at, hey, I spent 7 hours in this poker deck builder. That's great, it's fun. But you have to think, if that game was released alongside maybe other titles, so it was released like alongside, I don't know, Shovel Knight, would it still have the same success? Like, I'm not saying it wouldn't deserve it. I'm saying, would it have reached the same people?
And
because
I was going to say, like, timing is another thing that, as an indie developer, you really have very little control over. Because, yes, you can finish your game and put it out there, but, what happens, like, when you have something like COVID that hit? Or, Nintendo decides to release a big press statement, the day of your game's being released. It's, again, like that kind of trickiness. Because, as we've said, I've noticed with developers about this, that the success of a game can sometimes come down to just what else is happening around that time. If you're the first game to, do X, Y, and Z right, that's amazing. If you're the second game to do X, Y, and Z right, more likely no one's going to hear about it because they're all, happy with the first game.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, 2 games that are really similar might be released really close to each other, even though they've been in development both for a couple of years and both didn't know about the other. And maybe at the point it's just about who released the game first. And it's also maybe, I'm sure that there are people who have released the game like in the last couple days who didn't expect a Silksong reveal, like, to randomly drop in a Nintendo Direct. And maybe their announcement was overshadowed by that, a lot that you can plan around. And at the point, it's purely luck.
But that doesn't stop people from trying again to come up with that formula for how to make the perfect game. And it's something I've said, time and time again, like there is no formula to making like that one, perfect market segment game.
There are, of course, like genres or games or art styles that sell more, or
Mm-hmm.
they're just like more visually appealing, because there's always like that component, and that comes back to making a product. It's
Mm-hmm.
even things like, I don't know, for AAA games has been like battle pass and loot boxes, but for smaller games, maybe something else. There's always like things that attract people, but you can't set out to make a game that's successful and be 100% sure that it's gonna be actually successful. You, it's not something you can plan. Uh,
Unfortunately, no. Like, if anyone says they have the perfect guide to becoming rich making games, it unfortunately does not exist. I think with that, I am just about out of questions for you, Filippo. I guess before we kind of go into our wrap up for the cast, anything else from a game dev, design topic perspective that you want to touch on?
I think we've talked about the thing that currently interests me more. I think this whole thing's about making a product versus making like something you enjoy, not necessarily only talking about like art. Even making, like, if I enjoy making, I don't know, farming simulator racing games, I don't know, like weird combinations, it's not always gonna work. And
Yeah.
also we're obviously like, we're not making a game that falls in any like genre that's, I would say, it's popular, it's not visually appealing, but, and like right now we can afford to make a game like this, but obviously going forward it's going to be much more important for us to think about this. And I think that's a thing that most indie developers who are actually trying to make a living out of game development have to think about. Unfortunately, you have to make compromises on your dreams, on often the games you want to make, but that doesn't mean not trying, because then we wouldn't have any of the popular recent games like Thousand Times Resist or Balatro of Washing, any of those games. So you have to strike a balance and like feel how the game is being perceived by others.
And at the end of the day, if you can make something that you can, grow your studio on, that you can improve with, and keep going, that can be a success in its own right. Like you said a few minutes ago about like some developers or the idea that you should be growing from game to game. I've seen some developers who every game just plays almost exactly the same. Same bugs, same issues, same pain points. And at some point, the consumer is just going to get tired of that. If this annoyed me in game number 3, and you're up to game number 6 and it's still there, why would I want to keep supporting that?
Yeah, there is the whole journey. You have to grow in some way. And as I said before, it's not about making necessarily a better game, like a game that sells more. It's more about trying to fix previous issues and trying to fix whatever you can, because as indie developers, usually teams are made of really like couple people, or maybe there are a lot of solo devs. And if you don't fix those small issues, as I said, it can tire people out.
And once they leave, they're not coming back. And that's unfortunately a painful lesson for a lot of developers. So I think with that, we can wrap things up for our chat. With that, I just have a few like final questions for you, Filippo, and then we'll end things. So, first off, we are recording this at the beginning of April, and on your store page for Emily, you have estimated date for May. Is that still holding at the moment?
Yeah, the game should release around the 15th. Maybe we'll need an extra week, but the game is complete. We're just polishing it and ironing out some issues, and mostly doing testing right now.
All right. And besides being on Steam, is it going to be on any other platforms?
Currently, we're only planning on Steam and itch.io, and maybe we'll look into reaching other services. But right now, I think the game will stay on PC.
Right. And speaking about the whole idea of knowing what to do and how to grow, I guess here's like my scariest question for you. Have you given thought to what your team's next project will be after Emily is finished?
I have a lot of ideas. Recently, I've been thinking more and more about a specific game idea, but especially if we're making, like, we're 4 people, so I really want to hear what the other people on the team are thinking, because I can't force an idea on them and have that passion that we talked about.
So, before we kind of talk about, social media and contacts, any final thoughts, anything you would like to say to take us out on for tonight?
After everything we've talked about, I really hope that even we don't have a lot of wish lists, but I hope that those few people try the game, have a good time, have a good 30 minutes to an hour. And honestly, I wish for people to talk about the game more as a nice experience. I don't more than a product that made them happy, because people will find issues with the game, and I know, and I'm happy that people will find issues, because obviously I can learn from them, but I hope that people can go past those issues and still have a good time with the game.
So, with that, I think we'll wrap things up. And like I said, since we're recording this before the game is being released next month, I do wish you and your team best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. So, in terms of social media, do you have anything you want to mention? Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, anything like that?
We're currently on Blue Sky and Instagram are the ones we're updating the most, although the last month or so has been silent because we have focused more on the game. We didn't have much time to share updates. But we also have a small YouTube channel just for trailers and stuff. And I think that's it. You can try to look up the game. I don't know if you leave I can give you the links to leave.
Yep.
Below.
Yep, for sure. I'll leave those in the notes when this goes for recorded people.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So I think with that, we'll wrap things up for our chat. So for everyone watching, be sure to check out Emily. You'll find a link to that as well as all the social media contacts down below. As I said at the start, if you are a developer wanting to come on to chat about your game dev, or anything else, please reach out. And for those of you, of course, watching this on YouTube, do the YouTubing stuff, buy all the copies of my books that you see fit. And with that, have a great rest of your night, and come back for discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. So again, before we go, Filippo, thank you so much for coming on. And hopefully, if you are free in the future, we can have you back on and chat about whatever comes next.
Yeah, I'd love to, and thank you for having me.
No problem.
I'll be sure to come back with the next project.
Sounds good. So with that said, everyone, once again, thank you for tuning in. Have a great rest of your night, and we will see you all next time for another great chat.